Imagine a sharp bronze blade hovering inches away from a crying infant. The man holding the plow isn't a monster, he is a king. This is Odysseus, and he is frantically driving an iron plow through the sand, screaming gibberish with his eyes rolling back in his head. To anyone watching, he's lost his mind. He has yoked an ox and a donkey together, two animals that can't work as a pair, and he's sowing salt into his own fields instead of seeds. He is desperate to prove he's insane. Why? Because the draft has started and he doesn't want to go to war. But a soldier named Palamedes isn't buying the performance. He snatches Odysseus's newborn son, Telemachus, and throws the baby directly into the path of the oncoming blade. It's a brutal, simple test. If Odysseus is truly mad, he'll run his own son over. If he's sane, he stops. In a heartbeat, the madman swerves. He jerks the reins, saving the boy and exposing his lie. The act is over. The soldiers grab him. The real Odysseus, the slippery, dangerous survivor, is dragged away from the only life he ever wanted to protect. Stick around, because the story you think you know about the hero of the Odyssey is much darker, bloodier, and more human than the marble statues suggest. To understand Odysseus, we have to forget Hollywood, forget the noble speeches. This is a story about a man who would ruin his own kingdom just to avoid a war, and he had every reason to be terrified. The year is roughly 1200 BC. The world is ending. Historians call it the Bronze Age collapse. For the people living through it, it felt like the apocalypse. The great superpowers, Egypt, the Hittites, Mycenae, were crumbling. Cities were burning from Greece to Gaza. Mysterious raiders known as the Sea Peoples were scouring the coastlines, leaving nothing but ash in their wake. Trade was dead. Famine was everywhere. In this chaos, Odysseus wasn't a refined monarch on a velvet throne. Archaeology on the island of Ithaca reveals he was a chieftain, a warlord living in a fortified stone outpost. His power came from his ability to raid his neighbors and hold his ground. The ancient texts call him Polytropos, the man of many turns. That's not a compliment about his wit. It means he is slippery, dangerous, and willing to do whatever it takes to keep breathing. Why was he like this? Look at his blood. Odysseus was bred from criminals. His maternal grandfather was Autolycus, the king of thieves. Autolycus was a shapeshifter and a manipulator who could steal a herd of cattle and repaint them so you wouldn't recognize them the next morning. When Odysseus was born, his grandfather asked him to name him. He didn't choose a name like strong arm. He chose Odysseus from the Greek verb odyssos. It translates to the hated one, or he who gives and receives pain. From day one, he was branded. He wasn't destined to be loved. He was destined to suffer and to cause suffering. While heroes like Achilles were trained in BA, raw physical force, Odysseus mastered metis, cunning, the intelligence of the ambusher, the trap maker, the octopus that changes color to hide from the shark. He learned early that the world doesn't care about fairness. As a teenager, he was gored by a wild boar that ripped through his thigh. That scar never fully healed. It was a permanent reminder that nature is violent and unpredictable. You can't reason with a boar. You have to outsmart it or kill it before it sees you. Fast forward to the Trojan War. It wasn't a glorious crusade. It was a predatory raid by desperate Mycenaean warlords trying to sack a wealthy city before their own societies collapsed at home. The fighting dragged on for 10 grinding years. For 9 of those years, almost nothing happened. No Hollywood duels, just dysentery, flies, and rusted bronze. In this environment, the shiny heroism of Achilles began to lose its value. Odysseus, meanwhile, was nursing a grudge. He never forgot Palamedes, the man who threw his son in front of the plow. Odysseus didn't use a sword for revenge. He used a lie. He forged a letter, planted gold in Palamedes' tent, and framed his own comrade for treason. The Greeks, easily manipulated, stoned Palamedes to death while Odysseus watched, not lifting a finger. The son of pain had arrived. When Achilles finally died, Odysseus won his magical armor not by fighting, but by out-talking the stronger Ajax. He painted Ajax as a mindless brute and himself as the necessary architect of victory. Humiliated, Ajax fell on his own sword. Odysseus had effectively killed his own army's greatest warrior without drawing a weapon. Now the war was winning at any cost. Odysseus authorized night raids to slit throats and tortured prisoners for information. Then came his masterpiece, the Trojan horse. It wasn't a magic trick, it was psychological warfare. By marking it as a religious offering to Athena, he turned the Trojans' own piety against them. They had to dismantle their own gates to bring it in. That night, the Greeks didn't fight soldiers, they performed a liquidation. The sack of Troy was a horror show. Temples were turned into slaughterhouses. But the darkest moment was the fate of Astyanax, the infant son of the Trojan hero Hector. Based on Odysseus's cold logic that the boy would grow up to seek revenge, the baby was torn from his mother and thrown from the city walls, his skull crushed on the rocks below. The Greeks had won, but they had violated every sacred law. The gods were watching with cold fury. The journey home wasn't a voyage, it was divine retribution. The gods prepared a storm to break Odysseus's mind. First stop, the Lotus Eaters. This wasn't a vacation, it was a drug den. The lotus was likely an allegory for the opium poppy. His men, traumatized by 10 years of butchery, wanted to forget. A compassionate leader might have let them stay in their drug-induced peace. Odysseus dragged them back to the rowing benches, weeping, and forced them to face the misery of reality. Then the Cyclops Polyphemus. The giant represents raw, lawless nature. Odysseus uses his metis to blind the giant, calling himself nobody so the giant's neighbors won't help him. It's a genius move. But then Odysseus's ego ruins everything. As they sail away, he screams his real name and address back at the giant. This allows Polyphemus to pray to his father Poseidon to curse Odysseus. Odysseus survived the cave because he was nobody. He doomed his crew because he insisted on being somebody. To get home, Odysseus has to perform a catabasis, a descent into the underworld. He meets the ghost of his mother, who died of grief waiting for him. But the real shock is meeting the shade of Achilles. The man who chose a short life for eternal fame tells Odysseus that it was all a waste. Achilles says he would rather be a poor man's servant on earth than king of kings among all the dead. This shatters the heroic code. Odysseus stops caring about glory. He realizes that survival is the only thing that matters. But survival is expensive. He survives by having his crew tie him to the mast while they plug their ears with wax. Then comes the trolley problem of the Bronze Age, Scylla and Charybdis. Odysseus has to choose between a whirlpool that kills everyone or a 6-headed monster that will definitely eat 6 men. He chooses the monster. He doesn't tell his crew. He uses them as bait while he sails the rest to safety. He saves the ship, but he breaks the bond of trust. Eventually, after his men eat the forbidden cattle of the sun god, Zeus strikes the ship with lightning. Everyone drowns except Odysseus. He spends 7 years as a pet for the nymph Calypso, weeping every day on a rock. He is offered immortality, but he refuses. He would rather die a mortal in Ithaca than live as a boy toy in paradise. When Odysseus finally reaches Ithaca after 20 years, he doesn't come as a king. He returns as a filthy beggar. His palace is occupied by 108 suitors who are eating his food and trying to force his wife Penelope to marry them. It's a slow-motion coup d'etat. If he walks in as a king, they'll kill him, so he becomes nobody again. He spies on his own home from a pigsty. He reunites with his son, Telemachus, now a cynical 20-year-old, and they plan an extermination. The most heartbreaking moment? His old hunting dog, Argos, recognizes him. The dog thumps his tail weakly, but Odysseus has to walk past him without reacting to keep his cover. As soon as Odysseus enters the hall, the dog dies. The climax isn't a battle, it's a liquidation. Penelope holds a contest. Whoever can string Odysseus's massive bow and shoot an arrow through 12 axes wins. The suitors, soft from years of leisure, fail. The beggar takes the bow, strings it with a casual motion, and shoots. Then he rips off his rags. He blocks the exit. He puts an arrow through the throat of the lead suitor while the man is sipping wine. What follows is a frenzy of violence. He decapitates a priest mid-sentence. After the slaughter, he forces the maids who had slept with the suitors to scrub the blood from the floors. Then he hangs all 12 of them by their necks using a ship's cable. You think the story ends there? It doesn't. Happily ever after is a lie. The families of the dead suitors rose up, and Ithaca was on the brink of civil war until the goddess Athena forced a truce. But Odysseus couldn't sit still. He left again, wandering the wilderness to appease Poseidon. In a lost epic called the Telegony, we learn that Odysseus had another son with the witch Circe, Telegonus. This son came to Ithaca looking for his father, but ended up raiding the coast for food. Odysseus, now old and gray, went down to the beach to fight off the pirate. They didn't recognize each other. Telegonus carried a spear tipped with the poisonous spine of a stingray. He thrust it into the old man's side. As Odysseus lay dying on the sand, perhaps the same beach where he once plowed salt to save his first son, the truth came out. The return of the stranger had happened one last time, and the stranger was his own flesh and blood. So, was Odysseus a hero, or was he a war criminal, a pirate, and a terrible father? He is perhaps the most human character in mythology because he shows us that survival is messy. To get home, we have to leave pieces of ourselves behind. Sometimes the monsters we fight in the dark are just reflections of the men we have become.